Welcome to Prison to Promise, the podcast where we explore stories of transformation, justice, and the power of redemption. I'm your host, Dr. Craig Waleed. Today I'm joined by Jessica Younts, a passionate advocate, educator, and scholar whose work bridges the gap between lived experiences and systemic change. Jessica's journey through incarceration led her to becoming a leading voice in the movement for criminal justice reform. In our conversation, we'll discuss the power of advocacy, the importance of Florida's Amendment 4, the barriers of fees and fines at reentry, and the multi-generational impact of incarceration on women and families. Most importantly, we'll talk about hope and how resilience and vision can help us build a more just and equitable society. Let's go.
Hello.
Oh, Jessica, thank you for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Absolutely. And so let's just jump right into it because I know both of us still probably have a ton of work to get into. But I guess just for the record, maybe you could just start off by introducing yourself and maybe telling the listeners a bit about yourself, about your journey, and maybe what inspired your path into the criminal justice reform and advocacy space.
Absolutely. So my name is Jessica Younts. I am the Executive Director of Florida Justice Center in Florida. We are the only certified criminal legal aid organization in Florida able to do criminal legal aid. We provide legal services to basically break down barriers to reentry. We can do a whole bunch more, but that's where our area of focus is right now. So we help break down legal barriers to housing, education, employment by helping with sealing and expungement, mugshot removal, DNA removal, anything that really helps you on your reentry journey. We serviced over 2,000 people last year on over 4,000 matters. So we're a small office with a big impact. What led me on my journey was I have a felony conviction from 26 years ago. I was 20 years old when I was arrested, and I've had to live with those barriers my entire adult life. So it really led me on this journey to provide services and provide support. I didn't have much in my journey, so it's really important to me that we come together and provide support for each other on the journey because there's a lot of trauma involved, there's a lot of barriers, and there's a lot of roadblocks. And if we could just support each other to get through them and show that we can get through them and that we should be fighting against this type of treatment together.
Yeah, that's dope. Thanks for sharing that. How do you think your own experience with the criminal legal system shaped your approach to reform and work?
So like I said, I was 20 years old when I got arrested, and I guess I was too young then to really understand the criminal justice system and how it operated. But in retrospect, thinking back, I would not understand why there wouldn't be more interest in understanding why a 20-year-old was with a stranger and flying to another country and not think to ask any questions or to dig a little deeper. And I think that's the problem. You know, people are just so focused on the crime or the offense and not the person or the experience and what is really going on. We could get into the deeper dynamics over policing in certain neighborhoods, poverty, and why more people are subjected to becoming victims of the system. But the reality is, you know, that we've lost the humanity that exists in it, and we need to get back to that because there's so many more circumstances at play than just what happened on the day that somebody gets arrested.
You're absolutely right about that, and thanks for sharing that. There's definitely layers to many of our lives, and if you look back into the lives of many of us who've been incarcerated, you'll see that there's trauma somewhere there, and there's various levels of trauma. And it makes me think about like when people often ask the question, what's wrong with this person? Why did this person do that? Blah, blah, blah. No one asks too often anyway, well, what happened in this person's life? What happened to them? What led them down this road? And how can we help mitigate that? It's just about punishment, punishment, punishment. So yeah, I'm with you there. We gotta do better as a society and our systems have to do better. But I don't wanna spend a whole lot of time harping on your incarceration, my incarceration, and all the bad stuff that has happened because of these carceral systems. But I'd love to, like, maybe talk with you a little bit about the role that you played, maybe yeah, not maybe, I know this because 'cause I've read a little more about you since we last talked, but the role you played in passing Florida's Amendment 4. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say it was around 2011. I met Desmond, and this is what he wanted to do. And so we started on this journey. Florida Rights Restoration Coalition was a project out of the ACLU at the time. And what we did was we incorporated it as its own organization in 2011. And we just set off on this journey to really raise awareness at first. So we wanted people to understand the collateral consequences that we were living with not being able to vote being one of them. So, I just did a post recently about my son graduating high school and not becoming a statistic. And I don't think people really understand what that means, but as a mom, uh, he was born a statistic because I was formerly incarcerated. And, so the fact that he didn't get involved in the criminal justice system, which is technically what he was supposed to do, is a huge accomplishment, but I think what people don't see is that statistic doesn't have to do so much with our parenting, but those barriers that we talked about. Though me being formerly incarcerated determined where he could live, where he could go to school, what environments he was surrounded in, what resources he had available to him. And he was born into that. I was incarcerated before he was born. So he was born into those barriers placed upon him through no fault of his own. So that's what we did. We went around the state and we talked, we explained, we told people what we were going through. And then that just fueled the movement for the petition to get it on the ballot. And we did that. Um, there was some, pushback about the carve outs. I was not in favor of the carve outs, but it was, there was a bunch of us, so I was just one voice. But I really had an issue with the carve outs because I don't think we should be segmenting or segregating anybody out of reentry. If somebody served their time, the criminal justice system is already so flawed. So if somebody served their time and went through it anyway, we shouldn't be imposing these post-release restrictions on
That's
somebody.
unjust.
And so that's the way I felt then, it's the way I feel now. But we went forward with the carve outs because I guess the consensus was we really need to get this passed and impact as many people as we can, and then we'll work on the rest. So I think that was the motivation behind it. And, it passed and it was incredible. Of course, the government stepped in, the state legislature stepped in and passed implementation legislation, which reduced the impact significantly. We then went and started a program where we raised over $30 million to help pay people's fines and fees to make them eligible. This project, what was really important in this was, again, people understanding the dynamics. It's not whether or not somebody was going to vote, which voting is very important and it's part of it. But it's for us to have the ability to vote, to be accepted into society again. That's going to reduce recidivism. That's going to have the impact. The voting comes later, but we need to understand that we needed to give people that right back. And that's what we were fighting for.
Yeah. Give people back their humanity and the freedom to fully participate in society. And you mentioned something, about fees and fines. And so, you know, can you speak a little bit about how fees and fines and disenfranchisement continue to hinder successful reintegration, even though you folks have done this work, but it's still hindering successful reintegration?
Well, absolutely. Here in Florida, it was a big mess because nobody could even tell us how much people owed. Probation would give us one number, the clerk would give us another number, so we couldn't even figure out, for the most part, what somebody owed. So that's why the implementation of this law was difficult, because there were so many discrepancies that existed. But somebody's ability to vote should not be tied to their ability to pay. It just, and we took it to court. They said it wasn't a poll tax, but it was, on its face, you're just like, okay. And then the other thing is that I found interesting is it wasn't applied across the board. There were some counties that charged for incarceration and others that didn't. And it's just like, it's not even something that's unilaterally applied, so it's specific. How is it being done? And again, I just don't think that it should be tied to your ability to vote.
Mhm.
Those restrictions that I talked about earlier, those barriers on where my children can live and where they can go to school, they're all tied to policies that were tied to, whoever we voted into office, and that's why all that matters. For us to change these policies, we got to be able to be willing to vote and change who's in office so we can get the right policies on the table.
And we have to be willing to let our voices be heard. For so long, many people who have been impacted by the criminal legal system have been silenced. And there's other ways that we make our voices heard, but nobody's listening then. They, I think, take more action to silence us even further. Because what I could be wrong. So if anybody's listening, please correct me. But what I find is that lots of times people from our background were not listened to. So we do things that are explosive and disruptive and destructive to say, look, you're not listening to me, so now you're going to pay. And then when we do that stuff, then they come in even harder and it justifies, greater suppression against us. But I love, what you're doing, things like I'm doing, which is trying to organize people and get our voices heard. And, sort of like Malcolm said, the ballot or the bullet. And so we're trying to utilize the ballot right now because that's the only way we're really going to get ahead, organizing.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity for education too. Like I said, when we were doing the work, a lot of people didn't care about getting their voting rights. They were focused on getting their license back. We're trying to survive out here with all these barriers. So we need our license and then we can work on our voting rights. But it was an opportunity to express, even through my own experience, like, hey, the reason we're fighting so hard to get our license, to get this, to get that, or because the policies in place. And the only way we're going to change it is if we vote. So every opportunity, even in the direct service, became an opportunity for education.
Yeah. And we know that, proper education corrects errors, you know? And so when people are properly educated, they know better, they can do better. That makes me think of, what the old timers used to say, boy, why'd you do that? Don't you know better? Yes, ma'am. Then why don't you do better? So when you know better, you can do better. Tell me this, like, because you and I were talking earlier, and you talked about having a JD, you have a PhD, and so you straddle two important roles as a JD and a PhD, legal and academic. How do you merge scholarship and practice to push for real change?
That's a great question. So, obviously running a law office, the legal background is needed and valuable. Because I couldn't practice right away, I went into policy. Having the legal background, even in the policy arena, was super valuable as well. I love drafting legislation and being involved in the policy work. With the research that came and the education that came with the PhD, learning how to utilize the data and the statistics and research that and incorporate into the two can only help push policy. And that's where I think the merge took place, which just became super valuable because now I was able to understand research methods and how to apply the research and how to utilize the data in a more efficient way. So I think it was valuable to have both in this space. But I think what we discussed earlier, which is important too, is that even having those degrees, when we walk into the space, sometimes we still feel like a subclass within that field. And if I'm in the legal, oh, you're a formerly incarcerated lawyer. That label doesn't go away. Or if oh, you're formerly incarcerated with a PhD. Wow, that's so amazing. How did you know? And it's like something we could never accomplish, and we have to stop portraying those images. We're just as capable as everything else. The road might be a little harder, but don't let that stop us. If anything, that pushes us more.
That's why there's people like you and me out here, shining the light, letting people know that, yeah, though we've been down this hard road, we're just as capable as you said, and sometimes even more capable than you could ever imagine. And I often tell people, Jessica, that the most brilliant and capable people I've ever met in my life, and I stand 10 toes down on this, have been the people on the cell block and in the prison yard. And if it wasn't for those men that I met in the prison yards and the cell blocks, I wouldn't be Dr. Waleed today. I would have never went to college. It was those brilliant people that pushed me. And it's those brilliant people that I continue to do this work for, to encourage them to dig down and shine their light as bright as they can.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this, because you and I, we talked about women and, how women are often overlooked and, silenced and et cetera, et cetera. And I know that like women and families are often overlooked, and especially in these incarceration spaces and conversations. What insights did your doctoral research uncover about the multi-generational impact on women?
So consistently across the board, obviously, all of us had experienced some level of trauma prior to incarceration. But what I found was the trauma of incarceration had a more significant impact post incarceration than the trauma that they had experienced prior to incarceration. It surface leveled in different ways. Some had social anxiety, some had to go on medication post release where they hadn't before. They survived their trauma. It might have, put them in different difficult situations, if you will, but never to the point that it brought them to post the trauma of incarceration. So I thought that was pretty significant. The other thing that really came out that I don't think is talked about enough is the reintegration with families. There were these unmet expectations that came out in my study about the women that had children that had to leave their children, and the expectations once they came out of the family members, like, okay, you got to get your kid back, and not understanding how difficult it is to find a job and find housing, and again work through the trauma that you just experienced while you were incarcerated. Is it really healthy to jump right back into that mother role while you're still processing that
Mhm.
level of trauma without the support that you need?
Yeah, and that's so important. People don't understand the transitions that people go through while they're in prison and when they're coming out. It's a big jump. And that processing of, I like to say, just getting your feet back on the ground. A guy once told me, because, I did 8 years. And so he said, young man, I got out, I was like 28. He said, it's going to take you about 8 years to get your life back in order. The time that you were gone, it's going to take you that time to get it back. And so, yeah, imagine having a mom, and as soon as she comes out, whoever's taking care of her kids is like, here, take your kid back. She can't even get herself together. She doesn't even have her feet on the ground. So I think that would be even more harmful to the child or the children.
But it was the unmet expectations of the family members. So whether it be their mother or their, whoever is the caretaker, it was this expectation like here, instead of, what can I do anything to help you? Like during this transition, it was just, and so there's support needed from that perspective too. In my case, I got out and I got pregnant in the halfway house. So I
Yeah.
went from being somebody who experienced extensive trauma prior to incarceration, went through incarceration, and then got pregnant in a halfway house and became a mom. So my journey was interesting too. So I had to learn to process all of that. Thankfully, I had started college before I went to prison. And so my only motivation was to take care of my son and get back in school.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking you probably had some supports as well that helped you make that transition.
Not really.
Not really. So you white knuckled it.
You do what you have to do sometimes, but I think for me, and I've told this story before, is, I mean, I always had my dad, so, grateful for him. But nobody in my family ever went to college. Nobody in my family, let alone grad school. So, it was definitely a journey that I didn't know and didn't have support or guidance with. I just, I think I just kept hearing, no, I couldn't do that. And for me, that was more motivation. And I don't think it should be that way, but that was my journey. But I tried to be the opposite for everyone else. I try to be the cheerleader, like you could do anything you want to and just, put your mind to it and you can do it. And I'd like to be that level of support for other people because I just didn't have that.
And I could dig that, Jessica, and I appreciate you sharing that with me. And for any listeners that's listening and they hear that piece, okay, she didn't have the support, but she found a way to do it. Because if you want to do it, you can do it. Yeah. And I think what happens with a lot of us is it gets hard, so we stop doing it, Because think about it, we're humans, and humans like comfort. We want stuff to be easy and pleasing to us. And when it becomes hard, many of us, we just turn away to look for something easier. But we know it's through the hard work that we get I don't know, the greatest development, the greatest reward. So my hat's off to you. My hat's off to you as a single mom at that time, as well as, someone who pursued all these higher degrees. If Jessica can do it, y'all can do it, right?
Yes.
Uh, so tell me this, Jessica, like what gives you hope right now in the struggle for justice and equity?
I look at how far we've come, and we might still be having some of the same conversations, but I look to how many formerly incarcerated people are in law school, how many people reach out to me, how many are already practicing, and I was at a meeting the other day where they were deciding, not the other day, it was probably a couple months ago, but they were deciding how many seats there should be for the formerly incarcerated people, and all I could think was, why do we need to be limited to those seats? We need to be in other stakeholder seats. We need to be the state attorney. We need to be the public defender. Like, why are like even in this fate, we're like,
Mhm.
you know, putting us in that frame or that mold where no, we need to be in those other positions.
Right, right. I guess they want to limit the seats again, so that creates that competition, that crab in the barrel. No, I'm getting it. No, you're not getting it.
And I'm just like, we don't need to look at it like that. Like, fine, we'll get some community fill those seats to make sure we get those voices, but we need to be in those other seats. So we need to push each other to continue to support each other in their journey, to mentor whatever is needed on those hard days, like you discussed. It's not always easy. It's never been easy, but we have to keep going, or things are never going to change, and we need to fill those roles.
That's right. Bob Marley sang in one of his songs, "Get up, stand up." Then he said, "Don't give up the fight. Never give up the fight." You know, and it was those lyrics that really carried me through my time in prison. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Never give up the fight. And that's what comes to mind when I hear you saying that. We just got to keep pushing. And so, what would you say to someone specifically? Let's say, what would you say to another woman who's been impacted by incarceration and she's trying to rebuild her life today?
You're not alone. I think that was what I felt a lot going through it. Even formerly incarcerated law student, a single mother, and I definitely felt times where like, oh, like it would be nice to talk to somebody else who's been through this. And so my biggest thing is for women to know that they're not alone. There's so many of us, definitely reach out to me if you want to or need to. Just know that there's a whole bunch of us, and we don't need that external validation. We know who we are. It's so important that we value ourselves. We are not the result of our trauma, the result of our past decisions. If you're in that space, just know, just take that next step. Just keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can validate each other and yourselves. Yeah. And you said, yo, reach out to me. How can people reach out to you? What's the best way for people to find you?
A lot of people reached out on LinkedIn, so you're happy to, share my LinkedIn information, but my email is jessica@fljc.org, and you can shoot me an email or again, reach out on LinkedIn.
Right on. And so as we come up on our closing, Jessica, couple last things. And one is there anything that you want to share that you didn't get a chance to share?
I am really, really excited about our new parole project that we'll be implementing. And I believe there's about 2,900 parole eligible individuals in the state of Florida. Florida no longer has parole, so all these individuals have served over 30 years. We have about 200 applicants that have already applied. I'd really like to work with some housing organizations and figure out how to get everyone out of prison. Nobody should die in prison. I think that just needs to be our goal. If they're parole eligible, we do not have to get into the reason they're there or any of that. We didn't decide they were parole eligible. The already unjust criminal legal system did. So there's really no reason to have those discussions because I know a lot of places will go there. These are people, these are humans, and everybody deserves to be treated humanely.
And everyone deserves justice. I agree. And so this is a big project that you're working on, this parole project. And so after this, what's next?
Well, I just got accepted to a Global Women Leadership Fellowship where I'm going to have the opportunity to present the project to a bunch of women entrepreneurs that support other women. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to share that project.
Right on. Jessica, you're pretty kick ass. You know,
Thanks.
I really appreciate talking to you. I really appreciate reconnecting with you. And I'm certain that any person, man or woman, who listens to this conversation is going to find some motivation, some inspiration to dig deep down inside themselves and keep going.
Yes, you got this.
Right on. Right on. So thank you for your time, Jessica. And I'm going to call it a wrap.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Right on. We'll be in touch. All right, my friend. Peace. Hey, y'all. Thanks for hanging out with me for another episode of Prison to Promise podcast. If you or someone you know would like to share their Prison to Promise story on this platform, please hit me up at drcraigwaleed@gmail.com. I'll spell it for you. That's drcraigwaleed@gmail.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.